Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 132nd edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And this is the first edition of 2023. So as you can see, those watching on video, it's just Frank and Stan, no guests this week. So how are you, Stan?
Happy New Year anyway.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Well, I think we're at, what, 12 days into it, but how's it going for you?
Okay, I'm just thinking it's just getting to that point now where you stop saying Happy New Year to people and
Yes, yeah.
you stop adding it to something that you're about to say.
So I don't meet that many. I mean, I don't meet that many people face to face. You know, I
No.
do a lot of stuff online, and I don't know. Happy New Year. It doesn't quite feel right doing it online. It's the sort of thing you
No.
sort of do face to face. But anyway, yeah. It's before we get into this, Stan, Co-op Academy Leeds, a school that I used to be responsible for, got good in its recent Ofsted, and that is the first time that school or the predecessor school, and this is from 1993, has been judged good. So I certainly gave it everything I had, and I know a lot of staff and head teachers and senior staff, and well done to the trust for getting it over the line. So well done to everybody there. So that's my big news of the day. Just really good to see that. Really pleased.
What would the risk have been if they didn't to transfer it to another?
Well, they got one of our previous guests, Johnny Mitchell, got elements of good in the last one that he did, which is the one before this one. And actually, I mean, I don't know what more could have been offered at that time. I mean, at the end of the day, I was convinced it was a good school, and there were elements of good in it, but the overall judgment was still RI. So
I just wonder when we're going to get round to a circle where three different trusts have tried to improve the school. We're going to give it back to the local
give it back to
and then we can blame them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just wanted to give that a shout out. So with guests lined up between now and Professor Andy Hargreaves confirmed the date. I think it's in October or November. So we're certainly going to be, if our hearts keep beating and everything's well, we'll still be running certainly to Andy.
You're talking about my high blood pressure there.
But I was really pleased when Andy picked up. I mean, he's got a new book out in the autumn as well, so I think obviously we'll be promoting that.
I've actually sent him an email about whether he'd be in this country when we do our conference, but
oh wow,
he is, but only for a day, and he's only passing through on his way to Luxembourg, Oslo, and Australia. So
well, if you're watching, Andy, thanks for your support. It does mean a lot to us and to others who are eminent sort of educationalists like that who give their time freely to sort of just pop in and chat to us. But what we're going to do this week is I set a challenge to Stan, and it was to try and find some things that would cost very little to introduce that would actually have a significant impact on the quality of education in 2023. And I came up with 5 and Stan's come up with 5. We're going to knock it about a bit. We haven't actually chatted about the items, so I think that's the freshness of it. So I'll go first. Okay, so I think, I suppose in a sense, I feel as though the way that schools are judged as being effective is purely, really, sadly, about that institution. There's very little really to say how it sort of liaises with others. We used to have this, didn't we, in the olden days, Stan, judgments around how effective it used to sort of link in with the community, its parents and other services locally. But I'd like to go back to something like that, where a school couldn't be judged good or even outstanding if actually it couldn't prove that it was helping and supporting other schools that were less than good in its community, and actually that would drive, I think, force some reluctant heads to consider the needs of others beyond their walls and to think about how they might be able to offer expertise or even capacity to support those schools.
I would just phrase that more of a collaborative approach, though, because as soon as you say helping a school that's not quite as good as you put an edge to it for the receiving school that we're not quite as good as you.
Yeah, no. And also you don't want them going, well, this is all charitable work that we're doing. We don't really want to do it, you know.
And I can remember from when that was a thing, at my wife's school, a head teacher from a local school being sent along and talking to her and saying, well, actually, your results are much better than ours, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And I remember your school, because do you remember there was like a bursary that went with it, as some extra money for improvement.
Yeah.
And I can remember you feeling angry that you had helped a school, your staff had helped another school get better. The school that got better staff had got a bung from the government, and your staff had worked hard on it.
They weren't getting anything other than a feeling of goodness.
What I would like to say to that one is to say evidence that you have collaborated with other schools for improvement and show some improvement within the collaboration of schools.
Yeah.
So it's not quite we're helping the poor schools. It's the three schools together and we're making each other better.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to get to was a sense that schools were no longer judged purely on a single institution, and they were more a community resource, which I think is where we've come out of the pandemic, you know, with some pluses, you know, because everybody has felt as though there are still schools out there that still want to hold on to some of that great stuff that was going on during the most difficult of times.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is this great contradiction, isn't there, that you know, we want maths to be bigger because, you know, bigger maths and more collaboration, etc. But at the same time, we're going to compete school with school that are next to each other, and it just doesn't make any sense in the long term if you believe that schools working collaboratively can get better, which I have to say I believe in.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. There's a new interim chair of the Social Mobility Commission, a guy who is the principal at Oldham College, who actually today announced that he's going to be the new principal at Blackpool Fylde College, which is fantastic. They have a great principal there already, but who's obviously, you know, standing down. But to get somebody like Alan Francis to come in and take that on. But one of the things, he wrote a paper a couple of years ago for the commission, which was really about raising everything up.
Yeah.
You know, and although I argued at the time about some of the points within it, the general principle was right, you know.
Yeah.
So that was my first. So what's your first one, Stan?
First one is very cheap to do. It's for Ofsted to drop its ratings, its scores on the doors, and provide two things at the end of the inspection: a parental summary and a professional report to the school, which could be made available if parents want it, but written in professional language with activities the school might undertake to get better. Because when I've spoken to some inspectors recently, inspectors and schools, when I say, but there's no profession, oh yeah, that's all in the feedback.
I know.
Well, if it's in the feedback, give it to the school. Write the feedback in a formal manner and pass it to the school. Because, you know, everybody knows, anybody that's sat listening to feedback about their school knows that the first time you hear something that isn't positive, you don't hear anything for the next 10 minutes.
That's right.
I just think it's time to have a professional. I know that the theory that this is all for the parents, then write them a parental summary, because at the moment, the document you get isn't worth anything to a school.
I know. When I read the Co-op Academy Leeds report today, I thought what that school does and how far it reaches and who it reaches and what it does to ensure that the community is cohesive and the children get a good start. You know, none of that's captured. You know, it's just, and there are so few examples. You know, it doesn't really give you a flavour for what the school's really about.
And you could do that with, you know, what it's like to be a child here. This is what we have found as inspectors. This is what it feels like to be a child in the school that your child attends. blah, 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 blah. This is good. This is good. What could the school do to make it even better?
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
But it's still, and also, I mean, because there was also some other work I was doing this week, looking again at a paper that Dylan Willem had produced about, they're saying at the end of it, we must all acknowledge that bad schools, meaning really bad schools, are very, very rare. You know, so if we just accept that, then actually I do think we can get into the business of doing what you're saying. Maybe if we identify bad schools, really bad schools, you know, everybody should know about it, you know, because everybody should pile in to help it.
And there's the other, excuse me, that excellence doesn't require perfection.
Yes, yeah,
There's that, and the other end of the scale as well, that
yeah,
we can have excellent schools without absolutely everything being perfect.
yeah, I agree. Okay, well, my next one is it's all around how we understand what the views of key partners and staff and children are, and how we get that information. So I've come up with create a list of 10 questions each staff member's asked each year, and ensure that that information is shared with governors and trustees, and do the same for the children and share that, bring all of that together so that we end up with the community, the parents and the carers included, have an understanding about how people are feeling about the school, and actually then act upon that, and then do this bit about, well, you told us last year and this is what we did. Looks as though these things have improved, but this bit hasn't, so we're going to do this now. I just feel as though all of that is just left to chance, and I think it's too important.
Are you thinking in like an anonymous survey amongst the
It could
staff?
be. I'm not. I mean, I think the principle is just, can we try it? You know, I'm not sure how you get it. Whether you could do that in an open meeting or whatever, I don't know. But I do feel as though there's something. You know, it isn't beyond the wit of man to produce 10 questions which all staff could be asked. You know, it'd be quite interesting data.
Yeah, I think I was just laughing at the fact that I think if you can do that in an open forum and get honest answers, you don't need to worry about anything else.
No, that's
You're
true.
already at a point where that doesn't need to go anywhere. But I would say, to start with, to say yes, it can be anonymous, or you can put your name on it if you want to, and then have an officer who collects and collates all that.
Yeah, we used to use well, you've done this as well, Stan, but you know, when there was a head, we used to do this sort of staff survey, parent survey, but I used to use the local vicar who used to collate the information, and then it, you know, so it's completely anonymous. But you know, I mean, I just feel as though this is all just left to chance. I just think all of this is far too important, and that's probably where we could get a national perspective on this. And I know there are companies that do it, but there's a range of companies offering range of questions. There's, you know, different trusts and schools offering different questions. You know, I just think there's
I think we used to offer it in Learning Excellence as a staff wellbeing survey, I think it's called, which was very good, and it really did analyse all the answers. But I always felt, well, I know what it's going to tell me.
Yeah. But people then say, well, if it does, that confirms that you know your school really well, doesn't it? You know.
Yeah, and the opposite end is those things that surprise you.
Yes.
I mean, we definitely did, as later on in my career, 360 appraisals that were really quite harsh,
Right.
all anonymous. Yeah, I mean, I'm saying quite harsh as if I came out of it really badly. I didn't. I got some really, but you know, I thought if you had personal issues with any of your staff, it only needed one person to throw, because it always gave you a range of your scores. So, you know, if somebody's giving you a 1 out of 10 and most people are giving you 9, you still get range 1 to 9.
Right. Anyway, what's your next one?
Some sort of national pay agreement for the officers and positions in a MAT, so that we know what an exec head overlooking 3 schools, what the pay range is, and the same for officers who are paid. So if there's a CEO who's paid, then there should be, I mean, it's all paid by the DFE. It's taxpayers' money. So I think there should be a rate at which people are expected to be paid, and depending on the size of the mat, the number of schools, etc., then like the head of a school is in a leadership range. Because at the moment it just feels like it's a bit Wild West.
Well, we used to have it whereby my salary as a CEO couldn't be more than, I think, it started off as 8 times the
Yeah,
the full-time pay of the lowest
yeah,
paid worker. Uh, and but then the trustees were keen to sort of have a range, so it went to 10. I never got the 10, but actually, I think one of the things for me when that the inflationary element of it is when a trust takes on a couple of new schools, and even the trustees say, oh well, Mary or George, the CEO,
yeah.
has a load more responsibility. A couple of them are special measure schools, perhaps, but actually I think for me it was always times 8 or times 10
Yeah.
was the limit, because actually,
And that's what I think is important, Frank, because if obviously done lots and lots of headship appointments, and governors quite often want to put the range beyond the school's ISR, or
yes, yes,
the head's been there for several years, and we like her and she's done a good job. Can we not? Actually, it gives an element of control, and it gives those governors who think, no, actually, it's right that this is the rate she's paid at, so they can say, well, actually, no, we're fitting in with what the rules are. And I
yes.
think it seems to me there are no rules once you're outside of being a
Well,
head teacher.
not wishing to pick on the former social mobility commissioner, but there was a leak, or that trust's accounts were, or that school's accounts were made public, and that's a relatively small secondary school in London, but with a salary probably getting on for twice my salary when I was the CEO of the Co-op Academies Trust, and that feels to me
Well,
a
I'd
bit,
say, Frank, I've had experience of a executive head, sort of CEO of a mat with just 2 schools in, where the payment was higher than the director
of the
of children's services.
yeah.
And I just think, we do get this thing where the government say, if you've got somebody over 100,000, how many employees you've got over 100, but that doesn't say we need to cap it, or
No.
we need to see that we're getting value for
But
money.
but it is all inflationary, because in effect the head teacher's salaries, of which many of these CEOs come from,
Yeah,
they get to whatever, if you're head of a secondary school, it can be a very impressive salary if you go to the right end of the scale. But then you've got the inflationary element, the additional element
yeah.
for being responsible for
Perhaps
you and everybody else.
it could help retention if that jump isn't a massive salary jump.
Yes, yes, yes.
So that it's, yes. I mean, I'll give you a case in when I worked in Lancashire, which was fabulous. We had 2 very small primary schools. One was like a 2-form entry, I think. One was a 1-form entry, particularly small, probably 50, 60 children in total. And so, because they couldn't find a head, we agreed that they would amalgamate, and we'd have one head, still stay as 2 separate schools, but one head would be the head over both.
Right.
So it went to HR, who came back to say, yeah, we'll have to cut the salary though, because that school's only small, and if they're doing that school for half the time, then half the salary is
Oh, I
less.
see. So
Sorry,
it's
I'm
well,
taking on a second school, but actually, what that's going to
you're
do
going to
is,
cut your salary.
I do
Um,
understand the extra responsibilities and that, but I just think it seems to me by now we should have some order to that,
yeah,
so
yeah,
that
yeah.
everybody knows that a CEO of a mat with 10 schools in can expect to be paid between A and B.
Yeah, well, I remember being interviewed for Schools Week. They did a piece on me, and I remember being in a bar in London when I was being interviewed, and I hadn't been drinking, but I said, there is no justification for a CEO earning close on £500,000 a year.
Mm.
Absolutely no justification for that at all. And so he then said, well, would it be possible to name would you be willing to name that one? And I said, I don't really need to name it, do it, because I think most people will know who it is, you know.
Yeah.
But well, let me take my one on now because I'm conscious of the time. Abolish phonics and year 4 multiplication assessments immediately.
So not abolish phonics, abolish the
No,
assessment.
assessments. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, that was it was the assessment of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not decrying. You know, I mean, not phonics is important. You know, but actually, it's overemphasis on it. And I think when I've heard and I've spoken to Nick Gibb, you know, he often is very balanced around the statements he makes about this. This needs to be included as part of a broader range of reading.
That never
But
gets
no, I
translated.
know. But I've heard Nick say that a few times, and you know, I think that is lost. And I think the reason it's lost is because schools feel as though they're going to be held to account. Certainly, year 1 teachers feel they're going to be held to account for how well they're doing the phonics. So
Well,
stuff
to
all
be
the other
fair,
stuff.
Brad,
Let's get onto the phonics. You know.
not just that schools fear that, because my experience in the early days of phonics was the DFE insisting that if we were going to do the training, we had to say that schools could only have phonetically sound books
Yeah.
at the level that
But
children read it, and no other books. So you know, schools were reacting to what they were being told was the expectation.
and that's coming out in Ofsted, or
It is,
not so
yeah.
much now, but it
It
was.
did early on,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So yeah, and I think that picks up on because I was trying to get a clip of Barry Norris's Room 101 statement when he said you know, he would get rid of all. He'd go back to sort of, in a sense, school-based assessments, and he'd get rid of those external exams because he feels as though it's corrosive and it makes for a very dull learning experience in some cases. But actually, you know, I was trying, so I will get to do that. I'm very keen because he's not very well at the moment to sort of push that out and to sort of say, you know, we haven't forgotten it. It's, you know, I think for me it was a very telling contribution that he made. But it's along those lines that I offer that.
Yeah, well, there's probably more tests and assessments that could go in that avalanche if we started it. You know, there's quite a lot of assessment and testing that goes on that's for no real purpose other
No.
than to produce a result.
Year 6 doing
Yeah.
previous, you know, SATs papers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure what that teaches other than the teachers concerned about
But I
pupil A
guarantee
or pupil B.
most schools are doing something similar in the next 2 or 3 months.
I mean, it's
because we've got a system where the schools are judged by.
so really, as we know, the curriculum broadens out immensely and in a much more pleasurable way from mid-May onwards.
Yeah, for 6 weeks.
6 weeks. Well, you get a couple of weeks for your half term, and then we'll do some really interesting stuff when you get back.
Yeah. Unless Ofsted are coming in, of course.
Yeah,
we'll narrow it back.
We'll have to narrow it back now. Right, your next one, Stan.
Schools to be encouraged to develop supervision for staff, not appraisal or even as part of appraisal.
Yeah.
But the bit in social services where line managers have time to talk to the people that work to them about the stresses and strains of the job and where they're up to and where they need help. And I just, whenever I've talked to schools, they've just sort of said, well, there isn't time, but you can make time.
Yes.
And I just think it's something that would certainly help the mental health of staff if they felt there was somebody on a regular basis who was going to talk to them about how well they were doing the job, what help they needed, you know, what's going on at home that's preventing you doing this, etc. And I don't think it's expensive other than in time, but I'm absolutely certain that schools that took it on would feel as though they'd got their money's worth of whatever time it took. In fact, I would say take a chunk out of PPA time to do that.
And without that consequences of stuff, you know, because actually, I mean, it's not. I mean, I'm trying to avoid making sweeping statements, but when it goes badly, you know, and the client culture isn't right in the school, you know, it's something where you really don't want to be too open about how you're feeling, what you're doing.
But But then if you do supervision well, there ought to be a way of saying, well, actually, you know, the supervision I'm getting from my line manager isn't working for me. I'm not blaming the line manager, but it's not working for me.
Yes.
Therefore, could we try somebody else being responsible for my supervision?
Yeah.
And you're right, Frank. If the culture is that good in the school that you can do that without fear or favour, then you've probably cracked it
Yeah.
anyway.
Well,
But
yeah.
it's something I think I don't think I've ever seen it in education, and yet when you mix with social care,
Yes.
it's a right
Yes. Yeah.
in
I know.
social care for
Yeah.
supervision.
Well, my next one, my penultimate one, is abolish charitable status for private schools. And I know that Labour are pursuing this, and I'm not saying this purely because Labour are
I think
pushing
it
it.
got defeated, didn't it, this week?
I did it well, yeah, but it's going to be. I think it's going to be part of their manifesto.
Yeah.
If they get in. But the thing is that I think there are a number of independent, private schools that actually, do reach out and do an awful lot to try and make their facilities available to the community. They try and offer endowments and sort of grants to encourage children to go there. But at the end of the day, I mean, there are just too many examples of very successful private schools, sitting on probably a vast wealth, still receiving charitable status, and it just doesn't feel as though it's a charity.
No, I noticed Carol Vorderman tweeted this week that amounts of money that had gone into private education during COVID.
I know.
That was an interesting concept.
Yes. Well, yeah. I think it's just around. I don't think it's going to. It will end up with I suspect, some private schools perhaps closing, but it won't prevent the likes of Eton and Harrow and whatever. It's not going to harm them in any shape or form.
And I love the threat that will mean hundreds of children coming back into the state system.
Yeah. Well.
And
right, what's your next one? Your penultimate.
An acceptance at national level that teaching is more than a set of strategies.
Yes.
What's really interesting, and I've not read it because it's behind a paywall, and I made the mistake of starting to read it and then stopping and then going back to read it to be told I'd already had my chance. It was in the Times. It's Hattie.
Yes, I know.
It's a quote by Hattie to say, it's slightly changing his view, and it's not about a series of strategies. There's more to teaching than these things.
Well, he's saying that people that don't adhere to or follow the evidence in terms of what he has found to be effective are suddenly producing outcomes with their children and their pupils, which are unbelievable. So we need to unpick that. That's what he's saying, isn't it?
But there isn't, and I'll defy anybody there isn't a magic bullet. There just isn't one. And it's about for me, it's always been about a teacher's ability to get right what a child needs at that particular point in their learning. And that comes through experience, it comes through knowledge and understanding, and a relationship with the child. And I'd already thought of when you'd asked me, I'd already thought, we need to get away from the idea that there's one way to improve everything, whether it be a national strategy or whatever.
Well, come on, Stan, you and I think, left headship, because I certainly left headship because I couldn't deliver the national literacy strategy.
No, well, I've said
I just couldn't do it.
I just said we weren't doing it.
I'm doing it.
I'm not doing it. I mean, I was in a very fortunate position that I had really good staff. I had cracking results, and it was hard for anybody to say you need to change the way you do it. It's in the old days of levels, but we were sort of 50% of the school that were getting level 5s.
Yes.
And for anybody to come and say, well, you need to change the way you're doing it, I'd just say, why would we?
Yeah, we were the same. We were the same.
But we said we weren't doing it, and then we left it for probably 2 years, picked the bits out of it that worked, and introduced those into the way we worked anyway. So we didn't ever not do.
So you were not open. You weren't closing yourself to.
No, And
elements of it.
we certainly never did anything around that ridiculous clock. Do you remember that?
I do.
15, 20, 10.
No.
What was interesting with that, Frank, is that
Yeah.
later in my career, I worked with the people who had been the literacy consultants, and they denied ever having supported that. And you just think, wow, that's
Quickly you've forgotten.
yeah.
Well, my one is I think I'm really keen on high quality work experience, not just for secondary pupils, which I put on here, but for all children. And it's interesting, some research came out this week that said that children that went to independent schools tended to have more work experience opportunities than those that didn't. And the poorer the community, the less likely you were to get the work experience, which actually, when you think about it, every child, I think, should have that sort of quality experience. It's not saying that education's all for work, but invariably, the vast majority of people will sometime enter the workplace. And I just think there needs to be, I think there are some businesses that go way beyond what they are expected to do. And I think there's something here about giving them a tax incentive to provide high quality work experience opportunities. And the reason I can offer that is that this is a no cost to the school. This is a cost to the taxpayer, you know? So I think that that's something that we really ought to look at. And the report was saying that, you know, it was an overseas report, looking at what they do overseas. And in some of the countries, it's made mandatory, you know, and I think there probably is an element where I'm thinking, no, this should be mandatory now.
But it also, I mean, from as a teacher, the schools in school industry partnership was something I was really into. So as soon as I became a head, my reception class went to Marks and Spencer's and spent the day there finding out how they worked.
Yes.
And to see it was a lovely bloke, the warehouse manager, showing off his big machine that crushed all the cardboard so it could fit in the skip. And for a 5-year-old to say, why aren't you recycling it? It was absolutely brilliant. But it's that bit about, I just think through primary school, you should learn something about how industry works, and you should have experience from people from work and working with them.
Yes.
Which, you know, I can honestly say I've done that all through my career. Because it gives people, even at the age of 6 and 7, an idea of what they might want to do at a later stage.
I agree, and I think the thing is also, if they have those experiences, they might not be able to visit, you know, workplaces. I suppose that they can, but actually, all that culminates in a actual sort of practical experience where you have that chance. For me, it was around introducing children to senior managers in business, and these year 9s and year 10s were not familiar with the protocol that you have where you meet a senior officer from the business. So, you know, this is about, you know, we've had situations, which hand do you use to shake a hand? You know, if you shake hands, you know, how do you address them? You know, how do you keep a conversation going, you know, with somebody you've not met before? You know, these are sorts of things that some of the young people desperately needed, you know, and you only get that. You can't do that with an online thing. No. You need to do it face to face.
It's certainly from prior. I won't say the same for a formal work experience, but from a primary perspective, I found it very easy to engage with various companies. I mean, the local bank to where I was a deputy, the local bank set up an account that the children, a proper account with checkbooks that the children ran.
Yes.
They managed it for paying for other classes to go out on visits to industry.
Right.
But it was all and the bank were complicit in making sure it all was done.
Yeah.
And it didn't take much. You just, you know, a lot of people, especially where they've got children themselves at that age, are really keen to say, I'll happily come and get involved.
Well, the last one, rest with you, Stan.
Yeah, well, we've mentioned it a few times, actually. Recognition that culture is an important factor in school effectiveness. And so that part of Ofsted's job is to make some kind of judgment on the quality of this culture, which is, I would describe it as, how does this school work? How does it operate? What's it like to be a member of staff in this school? And I just, it's not hard to get a grip of how a culture is, but you've got to be in there. You've got to do far more than walk in, wander around and walk out
Yes.
again. You've got to talk to people, you've got to understand, you've got to have people tell you what things work, what doesn't work. But I would love the description, as I said earlier, the Ofsted report to parents to be what it's like to be a child in this school, and include the culture of the school in part of that
Well,
positive.
that goes back also one of mine here about getting the evidence from staff, from
Yeah,
children, and having that available so that it's part of the sort of cycle of refreshing and renewal. You know, that you consider, you know, have we moved on? Have we still got some sticking points here? You know, that and a real determination to try and address those issues rather than just sweep them away. You know, because we
yeah,
don't really want Ofsted to see those, do we?
yeah. Or it's not possible to grade that, so we won't
Oh,
we
yeah,
won't
yeah,
do
yeah,
anything on
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Which is, it goes back to the old, if we can't measure it, it's not important.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's our 10, folks. Those are our 10 relatively cheap things that could be introduced in the next year that could have could markedly improve the quality of education, not just in one school, but in many, many schools. So if you've got others that you wish to throw in, you know,
Yeah,
please send them to us. We'll consider them if we get any next week. And next week we have we're just working through lining up the guests for next week because unfortunately the guest that we'd planned for a completely understandable reason is not available. So I think we probably will have a guest, but if that is the case, we'll find time to take any of these suggestions and slot those into the chat.
and should
So
we make these suggestions available to us next December to
yes,
see if any of them have
see if
come
any of them
to
have come about.
fruition?
Yeah. Well, looking at them, I suspect it might not. There may be some, I mean,
Yeah,
there may be some schools that are, it's not being brave, it's being sort of doing the right thing, isn't it?
yeah,
We'll address these
I'm
sorts of,
benefiting from doing
yeah,
the right
yeah,
things.
yeah. Okay, well, that's our first of 2023.
Yeah,
And oh, we've got some little gifts that we give to our guests, haven't we? We've got new
yeah.
gifts lined up. So if you fancy being a guest and you've not been before, because once you've been on once, you get your gift. But if you come back, no more gifts. The experience was enough.
We're not doing the same thing with 2 written on it.
Anyway, so thanks for joining us, and we'll all being well, see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.